write a book. I remain on paralysis because not even 2 pages came out. So that assignment was huge for me. But the inspiration was, of course, the whole idea of seeking and deliberating on alternative perspectives on crisis management, and throughout seeing that, okay, it's a crisis, people are in desolate and are not doing well, but okay, let's come up with something. So that was the whole inspiration. But had he not said anything, I can promise you we wouldn't be here. So yes, the inspiration came from him because of honesty as an author. And I had not gone into this terrain. But like he said, run with it. Get it, see where you go. And as he said, when you were saying those things, we really are on the right track. We're on the right track. And why I'm happy is because the kind of work I do is always subject to review. So when I hear someone talk and almost agree, I'm at peace. So yes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Wow, this sounds interesting. We want to affirm what Babu Morris. Can we find it here? There are a lot of things that drives us towards the book. And we've had crisis as an opportunity. Babu Morris emphasized that. Crisis opportunities. He gave us case studies of Excel. I don't know how I would handle somebody owing me 40 million without capturing any of the analytics. But gentlemen, we also heard that in Japan, they would say in Japan there is no word called crisis. To them, crisis means opportunity. But now, as the reader or somebody in audience, I've lost my job. I've lost a family member. I've lost business. If I read this book, what will change my mind from still defining crisis as a disaster, as an undesirable situation and circumstance? As I go through this book, what will make me say, hold on, you are in the best position you've ever been in your life?
Well, the reality of crisis is that the wolves are here. You are facing something that's definite. I want to make an example. I hope Prof won't mind, because I was so inspired by what he did. So Tata Khadebe's younger brother passed away, and how he responded to it inspired me, because even in the midst of grief, he said, he made a vow and said, I'm going to start a youth program in honor of him. So here's the crisis. I don't think there's a greater crisis. I think even the 40 million is nothing compared to losing a loved one. But facing something as heavy as that, but still, Motunyaga Papa. But facing something as heavy as that, and still have the perspective that something good can come out of this. Now, out of that tragedy, that crisis, there's going to be thousands and thousands of young people that are going to now benefit. So that's the other side. So throughout the book, we talk about things like creativity. If you are a business person and suddenly you need alternative systems, there's opportunity to go online, for example. I want to make another example, the ULP, for instance. Yeah. So ULP, what we used to do, you know this very well. We used to bring a prominent business person and then fill the place up with maybe 150 people. And and then they'll do a speech about who they are, etc. Now, with the current crisis, we can't do that. But we've had to become innovative. We've had to then create new ways of delivering. We haven't changed the message. We still want to inspire people to become. We still want to unleash people's leadership. But now we've added new programs. We've come up with new ways of doing the dialogues. And now we're streaming, and instead of reaching 200 people in the house, we can reach 2,000 people online. So you see that the crisis came, but if it had never come, we might have stuck to the same old for the next 10 years. But because of the crisis, we had to quickly change and adapt, and it has benefited the organization. Yeah. So in reading the book, you get a sense of all those things: creativity, innovation, reflect. So there's a lot of different touch points. It's jam-packed with different touch points that will tell you how to change your perspective when you meet with crisis.
Wow. This is so interesting. This is so inspiring. I realize as you are speaking, you touched the first three, CRI. And I've never thought crisis as an abbreviation or as an acronym. It tells you when you've written more than 20 books, you look one word and one word expands. But with dissent, Baloyi, take us through ISIS. I like that one. ISIS.
I think ISIS is a terror group. To the best of my knowledge, and one of the other things that came from confidence, now that you talk about ISIS, and now I must think about Al-Qaeda. And one of the things about him is that because we wrote about crisis, you may not have even seen the profundity of today. It's 9/11. Remember the crisis of 2001? So then we're launching it on 9/11 because I'm dealing with ISIS. But the other thing to also notice, because now I must deal with ISIS, is that it didn't start like this. It of course was birthed from ideas. It didn't start like it was first literally what
Born in crisis. You always need a working title. But you know what? If I can just interject, when we dealt with that, and this came up. This is a title that he came up with. As we brainstorming, that's why they say two heads are always better than one. So the original was Born in Crisis, and he raised up some good points, and he landed on this title, Garamana. This is what we call in the book. So
that's
to take it
one about being born in crisis. Okay.
Yes. So when you read the book, you will see that we follow a very systemic or chronological order, following the word crisis. So, and we follow it systemic because I does not come before R. The second I does not come before the first one. So, first of all, we borrow on the term seize the moment. But then we change to the word see, of seize to stop. Which is the first, which is to seize and to create. Because in any crisis, you cannot do anything if you don't stop. You see, you first have to acknowledge. So the premise of the whole book is to acknowledge the crisis and then reflect on the realities. After a point of reflecting on the realities, you are going to, of course, going to come up with alternatives which you have to initiate. Right? After initiating those kind of things that you have come up with, you serve the people. As leaders, you have to serve.
Yeah.
We call it servant leadership. And you do it in such a way that you have to inspire the people that you are serving.
Yeah.
And you do it how? Through sustaining certain systems and structures. And that's how we end with, you initiate those ideas, you serve the people, and through inspiration. And then you take the systems and structures, which should be sustainable, to be able to prepare yourself even in the possibility of another crisis. But then, to answer your question shortly, the premise of the book is to see the other side. Because when we are confronted by crisis, we see the face of crisis. The face of crisis is destitution, desolation, despair, right? But we want you to see the other side, where it is the road. Is it Robert Costus talks about the road not taken? Yes, so we want to see not the road not taken, but the side of crisis, the side that says we are rich. But then also we are quite deliberate in saying we are supporting the guy who's saying we are rich, because in him saying we are rich, it means that he has to tackle, he has to shoot the wolves in their own territory.
Yeah.
So even taking that perspective, you still need to reflect on the realities around there, and then initiate the alternatives. We talk about you shoot the alpha male so that you have a better advantage, because now you've weakened the pack. Or do you run? If you run, can you outrun the wolf in your own territory? so the reflection on the realities is quite important. So this it's a chronology of what to do when in that crisis, or how to see the other side. Natural fact, it's a blueprint of how to see the other side, or how to enact it. And we thought, maybe let's put it in the book, because I don't think as human beings, you did say that ideas have to be, preserved. And I don't think we should be strangers to the commonwealth of literature. So we must continue, and maybe it's there. I told you when I saw it, I'm quite chuffed that it's there. So that's ISIS. That is not a terror group, but I want to give inspiration.
Wow.
Wow, that's fun.
Let's keep them around. ISIS to crisis. And as you are narrating this story, are we rich? Are we poor? Both are here. And they are not going to turn back. Even in their minds, they find you being part of crisis. And they confront the crisis in front of them. And as we're explaining, two things happen in my mind. Because this is a platform of prayer. God drops some things. There was a man next to the pool, 38 years, crisis. He couldn't confront it. He ended up blaming the animal. The story that I referred to, 2 Kings of the lepers, crisis. They say, if we remain, one answer, death. Going back, no future in the past. Ahead of us, potential death, but they may let us live because we are dying already. And let's move forward. And now you are saying to us, let's not only confront crisis, but let's think beyond what we confront. Riches. The guy saw dollars or pounds. And that, I believe that what enabled him to march forward. Now we are in South Africa. Level 3, lockdown. We are faced with not only one crisis of health, but gender-based violence crisis, economic crisis, unemployment crisis. Now, among the wolves, there is a tiger, there is a bear, there is a lion, and there is python.
Oh, disclaimer, that one is not in the book. We just have the wolves.
So, how do we tackle this? Before this is the last question, then we'll give the audience. How should we tackle multiple crises? Sometimes it's easy to deal with one enemy, one Goliath, but being attacked on all sides, how do we deal with such crises?
One of the things we discuss in the book is the issue of responsibility. So, a responsibility, the root word is response. So how do we respond? And part of responsibility is leadership. So you spoke about things like gender-based violence, mental health, youth unemployment. So, and you know the thing about leadership is that leadership is a responsibility that must be carried by all. So you may find that you have somebody who maybe comes from a gender-based violence, maybe come from a home where there was that kind of violence. Or maybe you are somebody who, you know, because in this type of situations, people tend to alcohol and drugs and all kinds of things. And maybe you are somebody who has survived all of those. You as an individual, you have to be, you can't tackle everything. You have to look at one thing and say, am I, as a former drug addict, I know that this thing now is going to be on the rise, but I've survived this particular thing. And then you go into the community and you start initiatives that now the giant is growing taller and taller. But you have to become the David in this generation. You have to say, oh, this giant, because of the crisis, the giant is growing taller. But I'm gonna become a leader. I'm gonna become a David. You know, I think it was Mazmaro said, crisis creates leaders. And in this particular crisis, it's a great opportunity now because there is more need for you, if you are maybe tackling gender-based violence or drug addiction, to go and start an initiative that's going to tackle that. Whether you're going to go door to door, whether you're going to organize, you know, how can be dealt with. But you need to have the perspective that says, now that there is a rise in this particular giant now, I have to step up. And you may find that whatever that program is, there will be greater reception for it because now there's a greater need. Remember that crisis also increases need on all levels. You know, in terms of crisis, the need for compassion is greater. The need for security is greater. And all that, you know, Jason spoke about the fact that we touch on saving. And whenever you save, you know, so if you have the heart to serve, you're always happiest when the need is at its highest level. So right now, whatever sphere that you know God is giving you to tackle, there is a greater need for that particular thing. So it's time to start that initiative. It's time to go into the community, to go on, you know, whatever platform and address that particular need, because the need is greater than ever before.
So one of the important, or one of the areas I think are quite profound in dealing with maybe different types of crises, as you place them, is the 2 points that Prof spoke about first, which is environment analysis. You need to be able to understand the environment, because if you don't understand the environment, you don't get a competitive advantage. So understanding, you analyze the environment and you are able to anticipate what could happen, thereby preparing yourself or equipping yourself better to manage the crisis. So even if you, but remember, management of crisis requires strategy, right? So, but with all those things, you cannot have them without having understood the environment. I think we give an example of the corporate world where when this crisis hit, well, the delivery guys were the ones that were getting left, right, and center business, right? So the big corporates, Pick and Pays, they actually teamed up with another app that was already existing called Bottles.
Yeah.
To say, okay, now this is the environment we're operating in. Let us use our power then to bring more relevance to people. Now then, from there they were able to deliver food, right? To a point where now they've got their own app. I think it's called ASAP. But even before that, Checkers came with a 60-minute delivery app, and followed by Woolworths, I think that's something. But because they understood the environment, because if we don't act on this environment, we stand to not maximize. And remember, the business of business is to maximize profit in other people's worldview. So if we don't do that, we lose out. But once we understood the environment, and in another section you speak about the personal and public nature of crisis. So it just depends on whether the crisis is a personal one, is it a public one. And to lastly add on to that, it's because we characterize crisis in 3 tiers pre-crisis, during crisis, and post the crisis. Remember, before the crisis, no one is worried about anything. So there's relative comfort. Right? Crisis hits, we're all masked up. We're panicking, we're always thinking about discomfort, we're not thinking straight, and then later, post-crisis, we could be characterized by we are better prepared, better equipped, we are more knowledgeable, we have benefited from the crisis because we're able to see the other side of the crisis. And that's what we're trying to do, finding that opportunity to not be despair, but to search on going forward.
Wow. Wow, this is so amazing. We're gonna give only one round for the sake of time. So be brave, confront your fear of asking questions. We'll just open one round of asking questions. Anyone would like to ask? No question. One. Okay. One shot. Okay. Usisi la payana, uba balana, usisi emova. Anyone? The great doctor doesn't want to ask the punchline.
They've done an excellent job.
Wow. Any brave? You are women and men of valor in asking questions. Okay, let's follow that order. This one.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, congratulations to the authors. The question is actually, the question is meant for Descent as a new author. I would like to know, what did you learn in the whole process of writing?
Thank you. When I was listening to Prof, I was wondering, coming from my background, it's a policing background. The primary purpose of the police is to contain the crisis, and create a mindset of containment, not a mindset of looking for opportunities in the containment of the crisis. I wonder whether in the book you will touch on that.
Maybe, yeah.
Thank you. My question is directed to both authors because they co-authored the book. Mr. Descent talked about pre-crisis, during crisis, and after crisis. The question that I have is, are there different stages or different levels during the crisis, and at what point does a problem or an issue transition from just a problem to a crisis, and how do you identify that? So that's the first question. The other question that I have is, if you were in front of a person on the biggest bridge about to jump over, a person that has completely given up on life, that has lost all hope, what would you say to that person? Thank you.
You would imagine having authored the book, you would have the answers to the questions. But anyway, No one can ever monopolize knowledge. So, I got a question from my colleague at the University of the Land, Martha. What did I learn from the process of writing? Well, I suppose for this, because it was my first book, it is quite very different to what I'm used to writing. Remember, when we write, someone else must go check. What are you writing? Does it make sense? Is it verifiable by fact? And then they tell you whether it's okay or not. And you have to wait upon someone. But through writing this, you are able to express yourself in ways that scientific inquiry does not allow. So, what I learned is, well, it's a lot of hard work writing, particularly books of this nature, where you're almost trying to present a manual of how to mitigate a crisis. Well, the crisis will be different. Someone will experience crisis in this way. So you have to find a way to almost balance it in such a way that, and this is one of the reasons why we changed from boarding crisis to, so that it must find relevance in everyone. It's not for a person who is poor. So if we say boarding crisis, if I was not boarding crisis, then this is not my book. See, but everyone experiences crisis. Like he said, big corporates experience crisis. But then, what do you have to do? They have to manage it by looking at the other side. So that is what I learned, that writing books of this nature gives you some sort of leeway and space to expand your mind. We've had a lot of sessions together where we were able to extrapolate on the ideas that we have in the book. And it was quite mind-blowing what you can do with an idea. I mean, those who write academics, you know that you can't just say anything because you feel like saying it. You must test it, either by fact, statistic, literature, or something. But in these areas, you are able to give inspiration through experience, through extrapolating on a particular idea or words, and that just makes all the difference. For me, I felt, but of course, the comfort was that I was writing with a guy who's written over 20 books, so then I got that comfort. You know when someone tells you, oh, you're on the right track, then I'm fine. You will probably see in the book where I was right. You will probably see in the book, because my first instinct was, hey, God, who said this? But we find a way to make it relevant to everyone. So yeah, that's it for that.
The second question about policing, and it's extremely interesting because our first instinct as human beings, it is to contain. So, for instance, if a bucket is being filled with water, and you start seeing the leak, the water didn't create the leak. The water just reveals the leak. So even crisis doesn't create the leak, it reveals where the leaks are. So in a situation like that, our first instance is to contain, but containing is not enough. Because containing, you are only at the first step. In the subtitle we say, what did we say? Finding opportunity in terms of adversity. So as a policeman, you go into a situation and the first thing is to contain the situation, which is the right first instinct. But you have to go beyond and say, okay, we've handled 5 cases of armed robbery in this particular area. Now, we can continue with the contained mindset, which is the first step. But then we can create systems behind creative and say, okay, if in this type of area, this is the kind of crimes that are happening, we can either continue saying, no, we must, when the crisis happens, we must contain,
or we can become creative and innovative and create systems that prevents that type of crime happening in that area. So we have to move beyond containing so that we go into innovation. Because innovation puts us steps ahead. So that instead of just trying to contain the crime, now we can prevent the crime. So the crisis, we acknowledge that is there, but what kind of systems can we create, can we innovate, so that we don't have to face this type of crisis anymore. So it's about moving them from that mindset of just a knee-jerk reaction and actually going a step further to create systems, ideas, innovation that goes beyond containing the crisis, but actually helps alleviate crisis from happening at all.
Wow. There was a question about at what point a problem ceases to be a problem but become a crisis.
Okay. And the subset of that is, I think it was asked by Beauty, that are the different stages in the crisis. Yes, I have spoken about what we refer to the pre-crisis, during the crisis, and post the crisis. So, and we define crisis. I cannot, but it's an undesirable state, right? So, there must have been a problem, right? We found a problem, but then it only becomes a crisis when it starts to cause serious disturbances. When it causes serious disturbances, it is a crisis. But still, when you acknowledge that and when you realize that, and you reflect on that, you know that you have to do certain things. And it depends on the nature of the crisis. Whether it's a financial crisis, it's a health crisis. It will depend on the impact it has on the pre-crisis. That must also now paint a picture of what the post-crisis should look like. So if we had a financial crisis, we didn't have certain things to deal with the crisis, the financial crisis. But during the crisis, we figured out, what is the problem? Post the crisis, we're supposed to know what should we have done. Because then, it's not necessarily a stage, but you found out more. So that's why we characterize the stages. We don't say that, okay, we want to give crisis stages. Well, we say these are the characteristics of what you had before. Because as you said yourself, 2019 we were all doing well. By this time, 2019, we're not thinking about COVID, right? We're in between now, and a lot of things has changed. A lot of the way we do things have changed. We've spoken about Teams and Zooms and all these things. A lot of things have changed. Now, we're also now going to characterize what should be done when now we've all gone through the phase of managing this crisis. It's gone. So then, what does that look like? We're back to calm, but we know something about this. You might find that people no longer want to continue with the boardroom thing. They want to continue online. You know? They no longer want to just be nonchalant about their health. You know? Now they want you to take serious. I used to, if you board a plane going international, I always saw Chinese people with masks. It was always surprising for me. Why are these people with masks? It was never the norm, but now it's a norm, it's law. You see? And afterwards, now it may not be surprising afterwards because it's post the crisis that's taught us to do these things, right? And to the last question on whether if a person is jumping from a bridge.
Yes.
Well, that's a question that is heavy laden.
Can I put it?
Well, I suppose you could.
I think such a situation, the Bible says, lean not on your own understanding. And we can become very presumptuous and start quoting things. Because the first thing I think for me would be, to encourage them on what is beyond this, whatever thing is disturbing you, there is a vision beyond that. But we should not lean on our own understanding, especially in such a time like that is bitter. I would ask God for the words. There's a Bible scripture paraphrasing, I don't know about it, when they said, when you are before the judge, I will give you the words to speak. So, because I will not have any idea of what that person is going through, I would ask God, and I believe it's such a critical situation, God will give you the words to say. Because to be presumptuous and just throw something at somebody in such a situation where you don't even know what they're going through, only God can intervene, and you just become a vessel that He uses to help a particular person.
Yeah, so when I heard that question, you took me back to my training now. Of course, I'm an academic, so now I have to think about, I was thinking now about two different concepts. Here I am, and remember, most of us people, we may not be aware, but most of us, we judge the worth of something based on two ethics theories. It's called deontology and utilitarianism. Deontology is judging the worth of something based on the act, right? So why do you kill someone? I don't like that you kill someone, right? It's killing, I don't like it. And utilitarianism is judging the worth of something based on the results. So you killed someone because he was trying to kill you, maybe self-defense, right? So that those questions come to mind, and if I encounter this human being that wants to end their life for reasons known to them, so then I have to think to myself, there is a crisis, yes, obviously. And the management, the way in which this crisis is being managed is obviously not, it has a utilitarian type of a feel, because this person now wants to end their life. But now I have to understand, I have to bring my worldview to understand that what would be the reasoning behind this. And I believe people who are better trained to encounter that type of scenario would probably be better to, I'm not even sure even talking to the person is the right thing to do. Someone will say, oh, I will look and see what happens. So you'd rather think, I'm going to think to myself, okay, there's probably much more to the world than taking this. Which may not be, it may be just my worldview, but this person has probably thought out the process and got to this end result that I'm going to do this. So I really don't know what I would say to them, but I'm telling you what will come to my mind. In terms of telling them something, I'm not sure. Sorry. What's up? I don't know. I don't know what you would say to a person in that situation, because that is a crisis. And the other thing about crisis is that you need to be trained well, of course, to manage it. Someone who bakes, for that matter, if they feel that there is a cake, and if the cake, something is not right, the ingredients are not fine, they will know what to do. If it's me who's just doing it for the first time, I'll probably switch off the oven. Because now it's a crisis, I do not know what to do. But someone who knows and is better trained, is better equipped to deal with the situation, either because of training or because of the gift, then they're able to do so. But I'm not sure what I would say to a person who is on the verge of, well, I hope they survive. I hope they survive and get to reflect on their reality. That maybe it was not, because reflection is important. Perhaps I could have taken the other side of it.
Wow. I like the two different responses. The other one, God, tell me. The academic of the side, I need the spelling of those two words, but you explain their meaning. And now, having had an uncle who committed suicide, having had two friends who committed suicide in a different way, one burned her life, drank petrol, poured petrol, lighted, burned to death. First person to discover her is a 5-year-old daughter, finding the pile of a dead, charcoal-lit being. Now, you ask yourself questions. Did I have a chance? Did they try to communicate that I didn't listen? And all that. So I think it requires both. While you are calling on God to intervene, you also analyze, contain it in that process. But before we create another crisis of hunger, we've come to a close of our session. It has been a great honor and a great pleasure to engage with the esteemed authors. Now you know how it feels to write 20 books. These things come at ease. You know how to co-author and write your first book. For me, it is a great privilege. And these gentlemen, out of their responses, I think they've given me 2 books to write.